Have you ever had someone try to control your life with a rulebook? Like the neighbor who measures your grass with a ruler? Or the HOA president who acts like they run their own mini dictatorship? Now imagine this. A quiet neighborhood in the woods, a man raising his flag every morning, same time, same ritual. And then one day, the HOA decides that flag doesn't belong. That man was me. What they didn't know. They weren't just picking a fight with a homeowner. They were picking a fight with someone they knew nothing about. And when they pushed me too far, I didn't just fight back. I called him back up, but let's not jump ahead because before the shock, before the standoff, before the moment that froze an entire neighborhood in their tracks, the HOA made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me and trust me once. You hear what they tried? You'll understand why this little neighborhood in the woods almost became a battlefield. Pinewood Reserve. On paper, it was paradise. Tall trees, quiet streets, kids pedaling their bikes, porch swings creaking in the breeze. It looked like something out of a postcard. But have you ever noticed that the prettier a place looks, the uglier the politics? They usually are. Behind those white fences and manicured lawns lurked the HO, a homeowners association now. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know it's never just about keeping things tidy. Oh no, it's about control, power, making sure their rules matter more than your freedom. And at the center of it all, Brenda, 60 years old, pink suit in the summer, pearls in the winter. The kind of woman who could spot a trash can left out from 3 blocks away. She didn't just enforce the rules, she lived for them. If your blinds weren't the right shade of beige, fine. Mailbox too tall, it's fine. Grass an inch too long, double fine. Now, here's where I come in. I wasn't looking for trouble, just wanted peace and quiet. But peace doesn't mean forgetting who you are. For me, it started with one simple thing. A flag, not a decoration, not some backyard accessory. A flag that had followed me through decades of service, through deployments, through friends lost and battles survived. To me, raising that flag wasn't just tradition, it was duty. So I built a flagpole. 20 feet of steel cemented into the ground, standing tall against the tree line. Every morning at 0600 sharp, I raised Old Glory, hand to brow, one last habit from the life I left behind. Sometimes neighbors stopped to watch. Kids pointed. A few even clapped. But not Brenda. First letter came a week later. Authorized structure, remove immediately. At first, I laughed. I thought, really? A flagpole? So I ignored it. Then came another letter. This one bold, underlined, and dripping with fake politeness. Failure to comply will result in fines. $50, then $100, then $500. Before long, I had a stack of violations thicker than a phone book. Neighbors whispered. Some pitied me. Others shook their heads. Why doesn't he just take it down? It's not worth the fight. But here's the thing about people like Brenda. They expect you to fold. They expect you to say, fine, I'll just follow the rules. But have you ever been in a situation where giving in meant giving up more than just the thing they're asking for? Where it wasn't really about a flag or a pole or a rule. It was about whether you were willing to be pushed around. That's where I was, so I stood tall. Every morning the flag went up. Every night it came down. Not once did I falter. And Brenda hated it. Then came the big letter. Red ink, bold font. Remove the flag within 7 days or face daily fines of $500. Non-compliance may result in property seizure. Seizure for a flag? Can you imagine? I remember standing there in my kitchen, letters shaking in my hand, thinking, these people have lost their minds. I tried reason. I called. I attended meetings. I even quoted the laws they were ignoring. But Brenda smirked her way through every word. To her, I was just a stubborn old man. A nuisance. Someone she could break. And let me tell you, she almost convinced the neighbors of it too. I'd walk past. And people would give me those polite little half smiles. The kind that really mean, poor guy. Why doesn't he just give up? They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what that flag meant. They didn't know what it took to break me. And the truth is, I wanted it that way. Because sometimes, it's the best defense is letting your enemy underestimate you. But here's the twist. They thought I was just a homeowner. Just a man with a flag. They didn't realize who I really was. And when they finally came for my flag themselves, that's when the whole neighborhood learned. The truth, now, don't get me wrong, some of this was ridiculous. One time, I caught Brenda standing at the edge of my yard with a tape measure. A tape measure. She was actually measuring the distance from my pole to the sidewalk like it was some kind of crime scene. Investigation? I leaned out the window and said, "Need help? Got a laser rangefinder that might be more accurate." She didn't laugh, but I did. Still, the fines piled up. The letters kept coming. The neighbors started to avoid me, and late one night, I heard footsteps outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw them, Brenda and 2 board members, standing at the base of my flagpole. Whispering, flashlights in hand. That's when I knew. So I wasn't going to stop with fines and letters. They were coming for my flag. And if they thought I was going to stand alone when that day came, they were in for the shock of their lives, because that was the moment I made a call. A call that would change everything and bring the past storming back into the present. Brenda wasn't satisfied with letters and fines anymore. No. She wanted humiliation. She wanted to make an example out of me. The next HOA meeting, I sat there in the folding chairs like any other homeowner. And when my name came up on the agenda, Brenda smiled that smug little smile of hers, tapped the microphone, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a violator in our midst. A homeowner who refuses to respect the rules we all agreed to live by." Then she held up photos of my flagpole like it was some kind of contraband. Flashbulbs from different angles, even ones she'd taken at night with a flashlight. People turned and stared at me. Some shook their heads, some whispered. A few looked genuinely embarrassed for me. I raised my hand, calm, measured. And I said, "It's a flagpole, Brenda, not a drug den." The room chuckled, but Brenda didn't. Her eyes narrowed. This isn't about patriotism. It's about compliance. And if you won't comply, then the board will be forced to act. Her words stuck with me. Forced to act, and boy, she wasn't. Kidding. Over the next few weeks, the harassment ramped up. My mailbox was tagged for being non-standard. Hedges were cited for being too bushy. At one point, I even got a letter saying the shade of white on my porch railings was not the approved tone. I actually laughed at that one. I thought, Brenda must have a swatch book at home labeled 50 Shades of White. But here's the thing, every little notice was a needle. And the neighbors started to distance themselves. Some whispered, "Why doesn't he just take it down?" Brenda always wins. Others avoided me altogether, afraid they'd be next on her list if they stood too close. And that's exactly what Brenda wanted. Isolation. But have you ever noticed something? When bullies think they've isolated you, that's when they make their boldest, dumbest move. And sure enough, Brenda made hers. It was a Thursday evening. Humid. The kind of evening where the cicadas drown out your thoughts. I was inside when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Headlights swept across my yard. I stepped onto the porch and saw them, Brenda and 2 HOA board members. It's flashlights in one hand, tools in the other. And where were they heading? Straight for my flagpole, I called out. Evening? It's taking a little. Walk. Brenda froze. Then she barked back, "We're enforcing the bylaws. This structure is unauthorized, and we are removing it." Tonight, removing it, my flag, my pole. My symbol, my jaw clenched. My fists curled. But I forced myself to. "Stay calm. Careful," I said slowly. "It's that pole's set in concrete. You might hurt yourself." She sneered. "We'll see." Now, I could have rushed down. I could have shouted, could have fought right then and there. But instead, I turned and walked back inside. And that's when I made the call, not to the police, not to a lawyer, to my team. Brothers, I hadn't stood beside in years. Men who'd carried me through fire and watched my back in places Brenda couldn't even find on a map. I spoke few words. I didn't need many. Just a date, a time, a place. And they said the same thing they always did. "We'll be there." The next morning, Brenda strutted past my yard with her clipboard, smiling like she'd already won, but she didn't know. The neighbors didn't know. No one knew who I really was or who was about to walk back into my life. All they saw was a tired old man with too many fines. But soon, they were going to see something very different. They were going to see what happens when you push the wrong man too far, and let me tell you, when my team arrived, the entire neighborhood stopped. Breathing Saturday morning started like any other. The sun filtered through the pine trees, Birds hopped along the fence line, and somewhere down the street a lawnmower droned. But for me, that morning felt different, like the air itself was charged. I knew they were coming. I had brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, sat on my porch with a mug in hand, and waited. Neighbors passed by on their morning walks, dogs tugging at their leashes. Some waved politely, others gave me those pitying glances. One even said under their breath, he should just give it up before Brenda ruins him. But then, the sound started. Not the soft hum of lawnmowers, not the chatter of cicadas' boots, the rhythmic, deliberate crunch of boots on gravel. I stood slowly, heart steady but beating hard, as figures emerged from the tree line at the far end of the street. At first, the neighbors thought it was a construction crew. Then they realized, no, these men weren't carrying tools. They carried themselves. Straight backs, steady steps. Eyes locked forward, and then the sunlight caught their jackets. There, caps. The insignia some still wore proudly. Veterans, my team. The men I'd served beside years ago, now older. Grayer, but no less sharp. There was Miller, still broad as a bear, his stride heavy but purposeful. Rodriguez, calm and focused, scanning every angle like he was back on patrol. Johnson, grinning like this was the best Saturday morning entertainment he'd had in years, and at the head of them all. Me? I didn't need to bark an order. I just stepped off the porch, fell into stride. Then together we marched toward the flagpole. The neighborhood froze. Curtains twitched. Lawnmowers went silent. Kids stopped mid-play. Even the dogs sat down, ears perked, like they knew this was something bigger than their morning walk. And then Brenda appeared. Pink suit, pearls, clipboard in hand. She froze for half a second, but quickly plastered that smug smile back on her face. Well, she called, her voice dripping with sarcasm. What's this? Some kind of parade. Nobody answered. We moved in perfect formation, boots striking the ground like a drumline. Dust puffed from the gravel with every step. Neighbors whispered. Who are they? What's happening? Why are they marching? Brenda's smile faltered, just a little. We reached the base of the flagpole. I stopped. The men fanned out around me in a half circle, standing tall, arms crossed or hands behind their backs. Not threatening, just solid, immovable. I turned, raised my chin, and for the first time in weeks, I spoke loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. This flag stays. It wasn't a shout. Kate didn't need to be. The words cut through. The air like steel. Brenda's smirk twitched. She tapped her clipboard nervously. You can't just gather people like this. This is against HOA policy. I almost laughed. Policy? That word sounded so small compared to the weight of the men standing beside me. I said nothing. Neither did they. I didn't have to. Silence can be louder than shouting. The neighbors felt it. You could see it in their face. It's confusion giving way to realization. Whispers spread like wildfire. Wait, he's not just some old man. Who are they? They look military. That's when Brenda snapped. She pointed a trembling finger at me and barked, "This is intimidation. I will not be intimidated on my own street." And then God help her, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a pistol. Gasps echoed across the neighborhood. A woman screamed. She leveled it, not steady, not confident, but desperate, tried at me. Now, most people would panic. Am I? Men, they didn't flinch. Rodriguez calmly stepped half a pace forward. Johnson chuckled under his breath like he'd seen this scene play out 100 times before. And Miller. Kana, he just said, "Ma'am, I wouldn't." But Brenda didn't listen. Her hand shook, finger twitching over the trigger. That's when I gave a small nod. Just one, and in perfect synchronization, my men shifted. Jackets opened. Hands moved just enough to reveal what Brenda and the neighbors hadn't expected. Weapons, not drawn. Not aimed, just shown. Enough to make one thing crystal clear. We weren't outgunned. Not even close. The air turned electric. You could feel the tension vibrating in your teeth. Brenda's face drained of color. Her hand trembled so badly the gun clattered to the pavement. The neighborhood erupted in gasps. A couple of kids started crying. But not one of my men moved. I stepped forward, closing the space between us, my voice steady as stone. "You think you know who I am, Brenda? You don't. You thought I was just some man you could push around? You thought this flag was just decoration? You were wrong. I leaned closer, my eyes locked on hers. I've fought for this flag in places you can't pronounce, against enemies you can't imagine, and I didn't come home to let you take it down. Her lip trembled. Her eyes darted from me to the men behind me, then to the neighbors, who were no longer whispering but staring wide-eyed at the scene unfolding before them. She bent down, snatched up her purse, and without another word ran, her heels clacked against the pavement as she disappeared into the woods. Silence hung heavy in her absence. Then, slowly, almost hesitantly, a clap started. One neighbor, then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire street was applauding, not cheering wildly, but steady, respectful, like they finally understood. And in that moment, everything shifted. I wasn't the stubborn old man anymore. I wasn't the nuisance Brenda tried to paint me as. I was something else, something they hadn't seen coming, and for the first time in a long time. The flag flew without fear. But trust me, this wasn't over, because Brenda wasn't the kind of woman to give up quietly. And the battle for Pinewood Reserve had only just begun. The applause faded, but the echoes of that moment lingered long after Brenda's heels clicked their way out of sight. Neighbors stood in clusters, whispering, eyes darting from me to the men at my side. For the first time, they weren't avoiding me. They weren't pitying me. They were looking at me with something else entirely. Respect. One man stepped forward. Kel, who lived 3 houses down. He'd always been polite but distant, the kind of guy who waved from his driveway and left it. I didn't know, he stammered, his voice quiet. He never said. I gave a small smile. Didn't need to. And that was the truth. For years, I'd kept my service in the background, never flaunted it, never wore it like a badge. But sometimes, the past has a way of marching back into your life when you least expect it. Rodriguez clapped me on the shoulder. Looks like the neighborhood finally gets it. But even as the tension lifted, a part of me stayed sharp, because I knew Brenda. And Brenda wasn't the type to run and lick her wounds quietly. Oh, she'd come back. The question was, how? For a few days. Things were quiet. Almost too quiet. The kind of silence before a storm. Neighbors started stopping by, offering coffee, cookies, even just words of thanks. One older couple said, "We've lived here 15 years. Nobody ever stood up to her like that. I appreciated it, but I kept my guard up. My men did too." They weren't here for cookies. They were here because we all knew Brenda wasn't finished. And sure enough, she returned. So it was at the next HOA emergency meeting. Flyers were slipped into mailboxes overnight, stamped with her favorite phrase, mandatory attendance. The whole neighborhood crammed into the community hall, an old log building that smelled of coffee and mothballs. Folding chairs scraped against the floor as people settled in. Then Brenda appeared at the front of the room, not shaken, not broken, but furious. Her pearls gleamed under the fluorescent lights, her clipboard slapped against the podium, out her voice sharp, cold cut through the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen, what happened last week was an outrage. A blatant violation of our community rules. This man," she jabbed a finger toward me, "and his group staged an act of intimidation on HOA property, with weapons, in front of families. In front of children." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. I stayed seated, calm. Because in situations like this, silence is power, Brenda went on, her voice rising with every word. This is not about patriotism. This is not about respect. This is about law and order, and I will not allow one man to make a mockery of the rules we all agreed to follow. She slammed the clipboard down for effect. For a moment, it looked like she had them. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Whispers started up. Some people looked my way, uncertain again, and that's when Johnson stood up. Now, Johnson had always been the joker in the unit, the guy who could make you laugh in the middle of a firefight. But when he got serious, people listened. He raised his voice, steady and commanding. "With all due respect, ma'am, you weren't out there last week. We were. And I think everyone here saw the truth." All eyes turned. He gestured toward me. This man isn't some rule breaker. He's someone who fought for every single one of you to have the freedom to even hold this meeting, Brenda scoffed. Freedom doesn't mean chaos. Johnson leaned in, his voice low but carrying. Chaos, lady. You pulled a gun on him? The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. People turned to each other, whispering, eyes wide. Brenda froze. She hadn't expected that little detail to come out. I finally stood, slow and deliberate, and faced the room. It's true, I said. She pulled a gun. Not me. Not my men. Her, and do you know why? Silence. Every eye locked on me. Because, deep down, she knew the truth. She knew this flag isn't just decoration. It's not just fabric on a pole. It's a promise. Oh, and she couldn't control it. Let the words hang in the air, heavy and unshakable. Then I looked directly at Brenda. You fined me, threatened me, tried to humiliate me, and you failed. Because here's something you never understood. I've faced worse than you. Much worse. And I didn't bend then. I'm sure as hell not bending now. The room erupted not in chaos, but in applause. Loud, real. Neighbors stood. Some shouted, "That's right." Others clapped until their hands turned red. Brenda's face turned crimson. She slammed her clipboard against the podium one last time and shrieked, "This isn't over." Then she stormed out, pearls rattling, heels clacking against the wooden floor. The door slammed behind her, and for the first time, Pinewood Reserve didn't feel like her kingdom anymore. It felt like ours, but I knew she wasn't bluffing. That woman would rather go down swinging than admit defeat, and as much as the neighbors cheered, I kept one thought close. She'd be back, and the next move she made might just push this fight into dangerous territory. The calm lasted less than a week. Neighbors started breathing easier, talking in driveways, flying small flags of their own. Kids rode their bikes without worrying about Brenda's watchful glare. For the first time, Pinewood Reserve felt alive, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. You don't spend decades in the service without developing instincts, and mine were screaming. And sure enough, it happened. It was late afternoon when I saw the black SUVs roll into the neighborhood. They weren't the sheriff's vehicles. They weren't delivery vans. These were tinted window, heavy tire, known-sense-looking trucks. Out stepped a group of men in dark suits, clipboards in hand. They didn't look like neighbors. They didn't look like friends. It looked like Brenda's last gamble. She strutted out of her house like a queen returning with her army. Her pearls gleamed. Her lipstick was sharper than ever. And the smirk on her face said everything. She thought she'd won. Neighbors peeked from windows. Some gathered on lawns. Whispers spread like wildfire. One man asked, "Who are they?" Brenda didn't wait for speculation. She raised her voice, projecting it across the street. "These men," she declared, "are here on legal authority. This community has tolerated a dangerous disruption, and today, she jabbed her finger toward my property. Today, it ends." Gasps, whispers. The SUVs suddenly seemed much bigger, much darker. I stepped out onto my porch, calm as ever. "Afternoon, Brenda," I said, keeping my voice light. "Brought friends?" "They're not friends," she snapped. "They're enforcement. They're here to remove that flag and deal with your little militia." The suited men straightened, clearly trying to look intimidating. That intimidation is a game of layers. And they hadn't seen the next card I was about to play, because while Brenda thought she was surprising me, I'd already called in my team, and this time, it didn't arrive quietly. The rumble started first deep, steady, like thunder rolling through the pines. Then came the headlights. Trucks, jeeps, motorcycles, vehicles carrying my brothers and sisters. They rolled in formation, stopping one by one along the street, doors swinging open in perfect synchronicity. And then, out they came. Veterans, not just my unit this time, but friends they'd called, brothers they'd rallied. Men and women in worn boots, caps tilted low, eyes sharp, not a word spoken. Just presence. The neighborhood froze. Even the suited men exchanged nervous glances. Brenda's smirk faltered. I walked forward, slow, deliberate. My boots crunched on the gravel. I stopped just a few feet from her, close enough to see her knuckles whitening around that clipboard. "You wanted to bring an army," I said softly, "but you forgot I already have one." The veterans moved as one, forming a line behind me. Not threatening, not waving weapons, just standing tall, disciplined, immovable. One of the suited men shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, maybe we should," Brenda hissed at him. "No, do your job." But the man's eyes flicked to the wall of veterans, and his confidence cracked. "This doesn't look like what you said." The crowd of neighbors who'd once been silent suddenly found their courage. A woman shouted, "Leave him alone." Another man yelled, "We're with the general." The shift was undeniable. Brenda wasn't the voice of authority anymore. She was the lone voice of desperation. Her last card was the one she always carried. The one that nearly shattered everything last time. She reached into her purse, gasps filled the air. Her hand emerged, clutching a small handgun. She raised it, her arm trembling, but her voice sharp. "Enough," she shrieked. "You people don't scare me. You don't control me. I run this community." The crowd recoiled. Some ducked, some froze, but not my men. Not me. I didn't move. Fast. I didn't need to. I simply took a step forward, my voice calm, steady, commanding. "Brenda," I meant, "put it down." She shook her head violently, waving the gun toward me, toward the veterans, even toward the neighbors. "No, this is my neighborhood, my rules." And that's when Rodriguez stepped out from the line, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You ever wonder why nobody stands with you, Brenda?" he asked. His tone wasn't mocking. It was sharp, surgical. Because fear isn't the same thing as respect. And today, nobody fears you anymore. Brenda's hand trembled. The gun wavered, and then she saw it. She saw not just me, not just the veterans, but the neighbors, the families, the people she claimed to protect. And not a single one of them stood by her side. Her bravado cracked. Her breathing quickened. The gun lowered. Slowly, and then she did what bullies always do when the mirror gets too clear. She ran, dropped the gun in her purse, heels clacking as she scrambled back to her SUV. The suited men. They didn't follow. They lingered for a moment, then turned and left, shaking their heads. And just like that, Brenda, the woman who thought she ruled Pinewood Reserve, was gone. The silence afterward was deafening. The kind of silence that follows a battle where no bullets fired. But a war was still won. The neighborhood didn't. Breathe until the last of the black SUVs disappeared beyond the tree line. For a moment, it felt like the woods themselves were holding their breath silent, waiting. Then came the release. People exhaled. Neighbors spilled into the street. Kids clung to their parents. The veterans stood in formation, calm as stone, until I gave the nod. Only then did they break, some clapping shoulders, others chuckling softly as if they'd just walked out of a drill. But the neighbors, they weren't laughing. They weren't mocking. They were staring at me. At the men and women who had materialized like ghosts from the past. Finally, Tom, the same neighbor who had once only waved, politely stepped forward. His voice cracked. "Sir, who are you?" All eyes turned to me. For a long moment, I said nothing. I'd lived in Pinewood Reserve quietly for years, never telling the full story, never drawing attention. But now, hiding wasn't an option. Straightened, my boots heavy on the gravel. "My name is Jonathan Cole, retired General, United States Army." Gasps spread like wildfire. Someone whispered, "General?" Another neighbor muttered, "No wonder." Rodriguez grinned, clapping me on the back. "Guess the secret's out, boss." I nodded, then let my eyes sweep the crowd. I never brought it up because this isn't about rank, it isn't about titles, it's about the flag. That flag doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to every single one of us who calls this place home. A hush fell over the crowd. Could feel the words sinking in, layer by layer. I pointed to the pole in my yard, where Old Glory fluttered against the fading evening light. That flag flew above battlefields where men and women I loved gave everything. It flew when we carried the wounded, when we saluted the fallen, when we prayed for peace we weren't sure would ever come. And here, I gestured around us. At the houses tucked into the woods here, it's supposed to be safe. A reminder that we made it back, that the promise held. A lump caught in my throat, but I pushed through it. So when someone tried to take it down, I wasn't just fighting for me, I was fighting for them, for all of us. The silence broke not with whispers, but with applause. Slow at first, then faster, stronger, the sound of neighbors uniting, the sound of fear giving way to something else entirely. Respect. One woman wiped tears from her cheeks. A man raised his own small flag in salute. Kids clapped without fully understanding, but knowing enough to feel the weight of the moment. Even my men, hardened as they were, allowed themselves a rare smile. But beneath the relief, questions still lingered in the air. What about Brenda? She was gone? Yes. Humiliated? Yes. But people like her don't just vanish. She still had her titles, her paperwork, her obsession with control. Tom voiced it first. What if she comes back? I exhaled slowly. Then we'll be ready. Not just me, not just them. I nodded toward the veterans who stood like a living wall of history, all of us. And that's when the shift happened. Because in that moment, the neighbors realized this wasn't my fight anymore. It was theirs too. Flags started popping up overnight in porches, in gardens, even hanging from kids' bikes. It wasn't just decoration. It was defiance. And Brenda. Oh, she tried. She sent letters. She left voicemails. She even had a lawyer draft threats of lawsuits. But something had changed. Nobody listened. The neighbors ignored her fines. They refused her demands. They held their own meetings without her, laughed off her threats. The power she once held had evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Because power built on fear collapses the moment people stop being afraid. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Rodriguez, we watched the sunset paint the sky. Keats laughed. In the street, a breeze caught the flag, sending it snapping proudly. Rodriguez chuckled. You know, boss, I think you just retired twice. I raised an eyebrow. First from the army, now from the war with Brenda. I laughed. A deep, real laugh I hadn't felt in months. Let's hope this retirement sticks. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Either way, you reminded them what freedom looks like, what standing tall looks like. And in that quiet, with the woods humming and the neighborhood alive again, I realized something. The battle wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't even about Brenda. It was about reminding people that courage doesn't disappear when the uniform comes off. Because sometimes the fight comes to your doorstep, and when it does, you stand. Not with weapons, not with rage, but with conviction. And as long as that flag flew over Pinewood Reserve, that truth would never fade. For a while, life in Pinewood Reserve settled into something new. Flags fluttered on porches. Neighbors waved more often. Kids played without glancing nervously toward Brenda's house. But if I've learned one thing, it's this. People like Brenda don't vanish. They linger, they plot, they wait for the next opportunity. And sure enough, she came back. It was a Saturday morning. Sun filtered through the pines, casting golden light across the quiet streets. Birds sang, kids rode bikes, and for once, peace felt real, until the sirens wailed. Not police sirens, not fire trucks. Something smaller, triller. Brenda's car alarm blaring as she stormed into the neighborhood meeting hall, dragging two men in suits behind her. Not the same enforcers as before. These were lawyers, their briefcases bulging, their expressions smug. Neighbors gathered, frowning, whispering. What now? Brenda climbed the podium, pearls rattling like battle drums. Her voice sliced through the air. This community is lawless. Rules ignored, fines unpaid, order destroyed. A T. And I will not be pushed aside by some retired has-been? Who thinks his army days make him untouchable? Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to me. I didn't move, didn't flinch. Just sat in the back row. Calm, collected. Brenda slammed her clipboard down. Effective immediately, I'm filing a motion to seize property, including that house. She jabbed a trembling finger in my direction and removed that disgraceful flag once and for all. Her lawyers nodded, shuffling papers like stage props, neighbors murmured. Fear flickered. She was cornered. Yes, but desperate people can still cause damage. That's when I stood. Slow, steady. The kind of movement that makes every eye lock in. "Brenda," I said, my voice firm but calm. "Do you know what happens when a commander loses the trust of her troops?" She sneered. "This isn't the military, old man." "No," I said. "But the principle's the same. When the people you claim to lead stop following, your power is gone." I turned, sweeping my eyes over the room. "Neighbors, how many of you still recognize Brenda as your leader?" Silence was deafening. Then, one by one, hands went up. "Not for her, for me. For each other." "I don't. Not me." "She doesn't speak for us anymore." Dozens of voices, dozens of refusals. Tidal wave she couldn't control. Brenda's face drained of color. She banged her fist against the podium. "You can't do this. I'm the president." But then Tom Quiet, polite Tom stood. His voice was strong, steady. "Not anymore. We're done." Applause thundered. Chairs scraped as neighbors rose. Two? Their feet united, refusing her one last time. Her lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. One leaned in, whispering, "Ma'am, if they vote you out—" "Shut up," she hissed, her pearls trembling. But it was too late. The crowd had spoken, and in that moment, Brenda wasn't president. She wasn't feared. She was just alone. She shrieked, waving papers, but the noise drowned her out. The neighbors' cheers filled the hall, echoing off the wooden beams like victory drums. Finally, she realized the truth. The battle was over. Not because I'd won. Not because the veterans had stood tall, but because the people she once controlled had chosen freedom over fear. Her last words were bitter, venomous. "You'll regret this." Then she stormed out, her heels clacking. Like gunshots against the floor, her pearls rattling one final time. And just like that, Brenda was gone. For good this time. The room erupted. Laughter, applause, even tears. Neighbors hugged, kids clapped. Flags were raised higher. Rodriguez leaned over, smirking. "Well, boss, looks like we didn't even have to lift a finger this time," chuckled. Sometimes the best battles fight themselves. As the cheers swelled, I looked around at the faces, no longer afraid, no longer divided, united. And for the first time since this war began, I felt it too. It's peace, real peace. But deep down, I knew one thing would always stay the same. The flag would fly. And as long as it did, Pinewood Reserve would never bow to fear again. The sun was setting. Over Pinewood Reserve, painting the woods in shades of gold and amber. The air smelled of pine and fresh grass, of a neighborhood finally breathing freely. Flags snapped proudly in the breeze. Children's laughter echoed through the streets. Neighbors leaned on fences, sharing smiles and stories. It was almost surreal. I stood on my porch, sipping a cup of strong coffee, and watched it all. My veterans team had quietly started too. Pack up, some heading home, others lingering to share a laugh with neighbors. Their presence no longer needed to intimidate. Just a reminder that unity and discipline could stand up to tyranny. Rodriguez came up beside me, resting a hand on my shoulder. "You know, boss, it's quiet now." "Too quiet?" asked, smirking. He shook his head. "No, peaceful. You did it. You didn't just defend a flag. You reminded everyone what courage looks like. And for once, it wasn't about orders. So it's about standing tall when it mattered." I looked back at the flagpole. Old Glory flapped against the wind, resilient. "It's not just a flag," I said softly. "It's a reminder that we've been through worse, that freedom isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes it takes standing up." Together. Neighbors started coming over, small conversations turning into gatherings. They offered coffee, shared snacks, and asked questions about the military, about the veterans who'd come to my aid, about the story behind the flag. The first time, I shared pieces of my past missions, battles, sacrifices. First time I realized how important it was to let the people around you see your truth. One little boy, maybe 7 or 8, tugged at my sleeve. "Sir, did you really have soldiers with you?" I smiled down at him. "Yes, and they were the best team a man could ever have." He looked at me, wide-eyed. "Like superheroes." I laughed. "Exactly like superheroes." The adults chuckled, some shaking their heads, some wiping tears from their eyes. And in that laughter, I realized something important. The real victory wasn't the confrontation with Brenda. The real victory was the community coming together. Seeing what's worth fighting for, and knowing that fear will never run the show again. Brenda was gone. Her threats, her fines, her little parades of intimidation, they were all dust in the wind. Pinewood Reserve belonged to its people now, and they had claimed it back. Rodriguez leaned closer. Think she'll come back? I shook my head, smiling. Not a chance. When people see the truth, they choose courage over fear every time. And Brenda, she's lost the audience she thought she had. The neighbors started raising small flags on porches, driveways, even from trees. It was contagious, a ripple of pride and defiance. I walked down the street with my veterans, nodding at people, sharing smiles. Each wave, each handshake, reminded me that this neighborhood was more than just homes. It was a community that refused to be bullied. As night fell, the flag flew high under the glow of the streetlights. And in that quiet moment, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Not because the fight was over, it was never really about winning or losing, but because the people had remembered what mattered. Unity, courage, standing for what's right. I turned back toward my porch and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a story about a flag, an HOA, or even a retired general. It was a story about refusing to bow when someone tries to take what you love by force or fear. And that's a lesson for all of us, isn't it? So here's my question to you. In your own life, what's your flag? What's that thing, principle? Or a belief you'd stand tall for Ivan when everyone else doubts you? Think about it. Because sometimes it's not about fighting with weapons or armies. Sometimes it's about standing firm with your values, with your community, with your courage. And if you take one thing from this story, let it be this: bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, steadfast act of refusing to let fear dictate your life. So the next time someone tries to push you around, remember Pinewood Reserve, remember the general, remember the neighbors who finally stood up together. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find your own way to raise your flag high. And if you enjoyed this story, if you love dramatic showdowns, clever twists, and real-life lessons wrapped in suspense and humor, then hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that courage wins. Comment below, what would you do if you were in the general's shoes? And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges. Because every flag deserves to fly, every voice deserves to be heard, and every story deserves to be told.